All rise for the jury.
Okay, your next witness?
People call Andrea Halverson Young.
Come on over here. Ma'am, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
And how do we know how to spell? I think Andrea. How do we spell the middle name?
Halvorson.
And your last name?
Young.
Okay, have a seat and please speak loud.
And would you indicate where you're employed and what your job is?
I work for the Michigan State Police at the crime lab in Northville, Michigan, and I work in the biology unit.
And do you have some training and education that helped you achieve that position?
Yes. I have a bachelor's degree in biology from George Fox University, which is in Newburgh, Oregon. And I have a master's in forensic science with a concentration in forensic biology from Michigan State University. Additionally, I've completed both the body fluid identification and the DNA analysis training programs through the Michigan State Police.
Do you perform DNA testing for the state police?
Yes.
Have you testified in court before?
Yes.
Have you been qualified as an expert before?
Yes.
District court and circuit court in the
Yes.
state? Your Honor, at this point I would move to qualify the witness as an expert. Is your field forensic biology and DNA analysis?
Yes.
No objection.
The jury is to consider her as an expert in her field.
And again, how long have you been doing this work?
Since January of 2005.
All right, I want to take your attention specifically to the case that brings us to court today. Did you perform some DNA analysis in conjunction, or I should say maybe subsequent to, your colleague Monica Borilski performing some analysis?
Yes.
And we've been told there are different sorts of testing that you did in this case and that she did in this case. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Would you just, what's the terminology for the sort of testing that she performed?
It's typically called autosomal DNA testing.
And you performed what sort of DNA testing?
YSTR DNA testing.
YSTR. And would you indicate what the difference is in the, so that we can understand it, in the autosomal testing and the YSTR testing?
Sure. So the autosomal testing is looking at the pairs of chromosomes, all except for the sex chromosomes, X and Y for a male and X and X for a female. And so the type of testing that I do is looking just at DNA on the Y chromosome, so specific to males.
In this case, there were 3 separate items that you were given in addition to a number of known buccal swab samples. Is that accurate?
Yes.
In order to extract DNA and create the copies that we've heard about, and then to prep a DNA profile for comparison, did you have to start from scratch when you worked with the victims' short swabs, victims' tank top swabs, and the swabs of victims' right shoe?
No, I didn't have to start from scratch.
So what do you do?
So basically the initial parts of the DNA process, the part where the cells are broken open and the DNA is separated out from the rest of the cellular material, and then the quantification step, all of that was done by Ms. Borilski. Then taking that DNA sample, called the DNA extract, and the quantification results that she obtained, I can then go forward with the YSTR testing. So at that point, I'm doing the steps where I'm making the copies of the areas of DNA that I want to look at on the Y chromosome, and then running those DNA on an instrument, separating those pieces out, and getting a DNA profile from that, called a YSTR haplotype.
YSTR haplotype?
Yes.
And does haplotype correspond with profile, or is that?
It's basically equivalent. A haplotype is just the word that's used for lineage markers, of which YSTRs are considered one.
Okay. And when Ms. Borilski testified, she talked about numbers ranging from the sextillions, I think, to picking a random person in a particular population that would match that profile, or that would have the same profile, down into the hundreds of thousands and hundreds. What sort of statistical analysis are you able to do with YSTR testing?
So it's a completely different type of statistical analysis. The type of testing that she did, because all of those areas of the DNA that she looked at are considered independent, it's appropriate to multiply across all of those areas to get a frequency in the general population. However, because the Y chromosome is basically inherited as a whole unit, a man's Y chromosomal DNA is going to be the same as his father's and his grandfather's, and will be the same as his son's. For that reason, it's not unique. And when I do statistics, what I do is something very simple. It's called the counting method. Basically, there is a database of males who are not related, and I can put this haplotype in that database and see how many other men in that database have the same haplotype, and then I can extrapolate out from that to how many I would expect in the general population to have that same haplotype. So it's a pretty simple statistic, and it's not, because of that, it's not the reasons I just mentioned, it's not going to be one that has numbers in the sextillions. It's nothing that has numbers that high.
What happens if you get a 0 in the database? In other words, can you explain that?
Sure. So if there is a 0 in the database, meaning that haplotype is not in the database, there's a statistical method that can basically extrapolate out, even though it's a 0, to how often you would expect to see it in the general population. And it's basically kind of a correction factor for small database size. And so it can still give a probability of seeing it in the general population.
Fair to say, in terms, I might understand the statistical significance of findings for autosomal DNA testing, at least at some levels when you find 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 matches, versus the sort of findings that you can do with the YSTR. Much lower numbers?
Yes.
Okay. And why, in your terms, why would you decide to do this after your colleague has already done autosomal testing on the short swabs, the tank top swabs, and the victim's right shoe?
Typically, YSTRs are performed in a situation where there is evidence of a male based on the quantification of the Y chromosome. Additionally, it's performed in samples where you're expecting a lot of female DNA to be present, and you don't want to see that female's DNA. You want to just see any males present. So in this particular situation, these samples were chosen because there was some evidence that there might be some male DNA present.
All right. And there were 2 records that you performed and came to some results on as part of this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
And 3 items tested. So referring specifically to record 23, there were 2 items submitted to you: victim short swabs and victim's tank top swabs, in addition to known buccal swabs from Christopher Lynch, Alex Schultz, Austin Albertson, Timothy Perrell, and James VanCallis.
Correct.
Were you able to develop a YSTR haplotype from the victim's short swabs or the victim's tank top swabs?
No, I was not.
So what does that mean what does that mean?
Basically, both samples had very low amounts of DNA based on the quantification. To be honest, I wasn't necessarily expecting to get results, but I thought I would try because there was some evidence of male DNA present. But basically, I got no results from those samples.
So you were able to make no comparisons or no conclusions from victims' tank top swabs and short swabs?
That is correct.
Were you able to make, and does that include whether or not you actually located or confirmed there was in fact male DNA?
It doesn't matter because there was such a small amount based on the quantification of those samples that it's lower than I would expect to obtain results from.
Okay. The other record we have has 1 item, and this is record 35, and this was a swab from victim's right shoe, again with the same buccal swabs. In this case, you were able to identify a partial YSTR haplotype.
Correct.
Correct? And in this case, it matched the partial, I guess, matched the buccal swab from Austin. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this is from the victim's right shoe.
Yes.
What does partial YSTR haplotype mean?
So whenever I say a partial haplotype or a partial profile, what that means is that I did not obtain results at all of the markers or locations that I attempted to get results at. In this particular situation, one area I got no results out of the 23 that I attempted. So because of that, I had to call it a partial haplotype.
All right. But so then I guess would you call it a match? Is it a partial match? Use the word match.
It is a match at all of the areas for which I was successful in getting results.
All right, and that matched the buccal swab from Austin, is that right?
Yes.
And can you explain then the statistical analysis you undertake then to call that a match? What does a match mean?
So what a match means is that everywhere that I obtained results in the evidence sample, the same result is obtained in the known sample. And so I can then put the results that I obtained from the evidence sample into a computer program, and it will tell me how rare or how common that YSTR haplotype is among males in the general population.
All right, and in this case, what did you find?
So when I do that, I do that calculation for 3 different ethnic groups, the 3 that are the most common in the state of Michigan, being African American, Caucasian, and Hispanic. So when I did that, the first number that I'm going to give is called the haplotype frequency. So all that means is how many times was this haplotype seen in the database. So it was seen 0 times in the African American, Caucasian, and Hispanic populations. So the next number is the profile probability, and that's what I explained previous, where I can, even though it was found 0 times in that database, I can still estimate how often I would expect to see it in the general population. And again, when I say that, that's for males that are not paternally related to the source of the evidence. So the profile probability for that is 1 in 2,070 in the African American population, 1 in 2,457 in the Caucasian population, and 1 in 1,580 in the Hispanic population. So another way to look at that, and it's really just another way to look at it, I personally find that statistics some ways resonate with me better than others. So another way to look at that is called the match probability, which is just how many times more likely is it that the reference person is the source of the DNA from the evidence than a random male in the population that's not related, again, to that male. So in the African American population, it's 1,776 times more likely that the evidence is that the reference individual is the source of the evidence. In the Caucasian population, 2,054 times more likely that the reference individual is the source of the evidence than a random male not related to the reference. And in the Hispanic population, 1,403 times more likely that the reference individual, so Mr. Albertson, is the source than a random male in the population that's not related to Mr. Albertson.
And those were the only 3 items you tested?
Yes.
Thank you for your time. We have no questions for this witness.
Thank you, ma'am. You're excused.
Thank you.
At this time, Your Honor, the next group of witnesses that we have are all approximately 90 minutes long, and they are not present.
We'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Full day tomorrow. Thank you. But for maybe a half hour, I have to take a break at about 10:30 to deal with about 5 cases. So
All right, so the jury.
please don't read anything, listen to anything.